Page 6 of the Express, or guess what, a split on Brexit, but for once not within the Conservative Party, this in the Labour movement, and some people seemingly surprised that Jeremy Corbyn actually not desperately, well, pro-Brexit.
As we approach
anti-Brexit, I should say.
As we approach Brexit, it's occurred to some of the Corbynistas that their main man is not a supporter of it. And they're taking to a countrywide tour of the left against Brexit, speaking to, buy your tickets now, people, of major cities this summer. And they're starting to perhaps be a split, which we already know there's already split anyway at the upper echelons of the Labour Party, and it seems to be coming throughout the parliamentary party now.
But the left in various parts of Europe has always had a slightly arm's-length relationship, love affair with the European Union. But look at Greece, for example.
Yeah, no, definitely. And even the Labour Party. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the left of the Labour Party was the Eurosceptic bit of the Labour Party. And obviously Corbyn is somewhat of a relic from that era. But one thing that's kind of picks up on is obviously there's certain people within the left of the Labour Party who have become very firmly pro-Remain. But there's also this kind of generational difference. So a lot of the young people involved in Momentum, fiercely pro-Corbyn, but also fiercely anti-Brexit. And I think his attempt at the election to try and look both ways on this issue and kind of just not upset anyone is now getting to the point where he has to recognise that he is leading a party which, on the broad stroke, considers itself the main anti-Brexit force. I think he needs to recognise that.
Since before the referendum, Labour MPs outside the Metropolitan Pleasure Dome have lived in terror of their Leave constituents. We can't support Remain, they said, because our voters will punish us. 7 out of 10 Labour seats voted to leave the EU. But it turns out they might be worrying about nothing. A new survey from Best for Britain, not the most unbiased source, but very rigorous with the data, shows that there was only a handful of seats where more Labour voters backed Leave than Remain, and that many of them would vote Labour in a general election, whatever its position on Brexit. Eloise Todd, Chief Executive, and a past guest on the show, said, "What this shows is there is an electoral dividend for Labour if they move position and oppose Brexit. Not only is it right for the country for Labour to do that, it's also good for Labour." So that's all sorted then. Jeremy's on board. But, you know, what do you think of this study? Because I've always been very sceptical of the idea that you would just lose a whole swathe of constituencies based on this one issue.
Well, there was a bit of a test, of course, in the general election where, I mean, way back when, we don't remember it anymore, but the Conservatives for a long time acted like they could definitely bring a bunch of Labour voters on board by just being harder on Brexit in the north. And in fact, it turned out that was not the case. So this is a very good, this is really expensive polling. And I think Best for Britain are using the Soros money that then was doubled up by the public when there was all of the unspeakable nonsense in the Telegraph. Yeah. In a pretty sensible way here. This is seems to be a good way to put the proposition towards Labour MPs. They're finding a bunch of seats where sort of Labour Remain support is larger than the majority of the Labour MP who is sat there. These are Leave voting seats. Right. However, there is an assumption, I think, in the research, which is ultimately that Labour Remain votes are very strong, very hard, and Labour Leave votes are very soft and are quite unaffected by the party's policy on Brexit. Now, that's not really been tested yet. There is a Peter Kellner piece in Prospect last week, which actually looked at some of the sort of the YouGov polls over the last sort of period and found a similar thing, that Labour Leave vote was quite soft. He was suggesting that maybe about a million Labour Leavers are now changing their position, along with Leavers under the age of 40, C2DE voters, women under the age of 40. And he thought that is, you know, that's credible, that is a viable route out.
Can I turn to one other subject? Because you've put your head above several parapets at the same time. You've signed
the nature of politics at the moment.
I know. You've signed an open letter to Jeremy Corbyn with a lot of other London Labour MPs, like Labour MPs from Wales and the northeast of England, doing the same thing, saying, please change policy and commit yourself to a second referendum or a second people's vote, you call it. Is there any chance of that happening at all, do you think?
Well, we are a political movement that should, and indeed is having this debate. I mean, I don't think anybody can look at Brexit right now and think it's going well. So I think it's absolutely right. Let me be very clear. Nobody's talking about rerunning the referendum. What we are saying is once you have a deal, so once you know what leaving is like, the idea that only 650 people in this country, because they happen to be in Westminster, get to say whether that's what this country wants isn't right to us. So we think the public should have a say now they know what leaving actually entails. You know, nobody talked about a £40 billion divorce bill when the referendum was happening. Nobody talked about leaving the single market in the way that we've now seen the government say they want to do. Things have changed. It's absolutely right. And frankly, whether you voted Leave or Remain, surely you should want to have a say.
I'm not going to channel Jeremy Corbyn. That would be implausible, to say the least. But I think
you'd be Tracy Ullman.
Not nearly as good as that. What I think he would argue is that the trouble with saying that you're committed to another vote, another people's vote, suggests that you don't really accept the result of the first one. And that is lethal for an awful lot of Labour MPs in the North whose voters voted to leave the EU.
And I don't think that's the case. Look, nobody is trying to dispute the fact that we had a referendum. Yes, I campaigned for Remain. Yes, I voted against Article 50 because I thought at the time this is a bad way of doing this. But absolutely, we needed a way of doing this to find out what leaving would look like. We will know what leaving looks like when the government presents a deal. I think it's absolutely right to say, is that what the public wanted? I don't think that's about undermining the last referendum. We know so much has happened in the last 2 years. And actually, if you are confident it's the right deal for Britain, if you are one of these people like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson, you should relish the opportunity to sell that to the public.